Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you live every Tuesday. Joining me to talk about COVID-19 is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid, straight from his home in Arlington. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, Paul, an awesome son of Africa who happens, of course, to live, as you said, in Arlington, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, a place where some decisions apparently that affects all of us globally are made.
What happened to your mask today? I was expecting you to be, sporting what has become your trademark now.
You know, it is very good to wear a mask, especially because you don't want to infect other people. You have to be in a situation where you are more than one person in order to be able to don that beautiful mask. So, because there is nobody right here with me except the fact that I happen to be interacting with you via video link, I didn't see any reason why I should probably get into the business that might make me look like I am acting the scene, when as a matter of fact, I am really dealing with the real deal.
Bring me up to speed. The numbers globally, the numbers here in the United States seem to be going up, no end in sight. Bring me up to speed. What is the world doing about COVID-19? What has the response been like from WHO and the US here?
No matter what people do or what people are doing, and right now, frankly, the most logical thing to do seems to be social distancing. It seems to be wearing the masks, as you suggested. But until and unless there is a cure, there is a vaccine especially that can get into the business of becoming the weapon of prevention. And until and unless there is an effective therapy, in other words, a treatment, my brother, the numbers are going to keep rising.
You bring up a very good point. Early results from Remdesivir clinical trials sparked hope, according to Anthony Fauci, the leading scientist on this coronavirus. The results from a clinical trial of a potential COVID-19 treatment showed good news. You talked about a remedy. I think that's something that is worth taking into consideration or celebrating if they're that close.
I think you are right, Paul. At least for the first time, sincerely, since several months, we seem to have something we could call hope. If that, in fact, that remdesivir turns out to be a sort of magic bullet, then, of course, we'll begin to see a light at the end of the tunnel. But, of course, as they say in science, this particular experiment, this particular research, at best, remains very preliminary. But as someone suggested, even a journey of 1,000 miles, the first step is the single most significant.
Yeah.
So we seem to be on the right track. And of course, over the Atlantic, in the United Kingdom,
Yes, sir.
at one of the premier British universities, Oxford, they also seem to be on the way to getting what would probably be an effective vaccine. They have been at it for quite some time, and preliminary findings so far suggest that if all goes well, they may very well actually end up getting that particular vaccination candidate before the end of this year. And if that happens, then of course, again, we may very well be at the beginning of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, in as far as this disease, this stubborn disease, someone has in fact called it a genius, the disease that has absolutely no respect for anybody, a disease that has no respect for borders, boundaries, not even President Donald Trump's wall that they are building in the southern states. The coronavirus has a way of negotiating and navigating its way around it. This is a disease that does not require a visa, Paul. But you know what? Man is a genius. Man has survived for many, many, many years and has been able to survive by making sure that he protects that species from adversaries. And I think that we are one of these days, we'll find a magic bullet. And then we'll go back to living the life not exactly as we used to, but somehow close to a semblance of the kind of life that you and I and others used to live.
When all these scientists are talking about coming up with a vaccine, they're not talking about a vaccine that could be ready tomorrow or in the next few months. They're looking at possibly a year. And when you look at how many people are dying on a daily basis, we need this now. So what can be done now?
Paul, apart from social distancing, apart from wearing masks, making sure that you do not infect the next person near you, apart from making sure that you stay 6 feet away from the next person and what have you, there are sincerely very few options that are available to us as tools in the toolbox to fight the coronavirus pandemic. But as we talk, of course, this particular drug that has gone through the first trial is very promising. And it reminds me, by the way, when I was a graduate student at UCLA more than 30 years ago, there was this scourge called HIV/AIDS. That scourge killed a lot of people, Paul. Initially, it was rumored to be a disease that affected people who were not straight, people who were gays, lesbians, and what have you, because it initially was identified in San Francisco. San Francisco happens to be a very liberal city, a city that in fact accommodates any kind of lifestyle on this planet Earth. It was also largely rumored to be a disease, basically of Africans, because apparently it may have come from an animal in Africa and all that kind of stuff. It seemed to be killing, or at least killing, people who belonged to the lower socio-economic strata. It had not yet attacked the CEO types, so that companies would aggressively conduct research that would result into either a vaccine or a cure. But in the process, they were able to come up with a drug called AZT. I don't know whether you remember that drug called AZT. And AZT, with a combination of other drugs, began to show some effective promise to such an extent that eventually it actually became a legitimate tool in the toolbox of fighting HIV/AIDS. And so I think that people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, a man that in fact initially got his fame by working on research that was involving the issue of HIV/AIDS and what have you, and eventually was able to wear a smile at the end of the day. I think that he and some of his colleagues are on the right track right now. I can see them coming up with some kind of combination of drugs including this particular one that he was talking about Wednesday. I can see them doing that, and once they get that drug, which is, by the way, a treatment, then perhaps you can begin making a legitimate case of opening up the economy. Because you cannot talk about opening up the economy at the expense of life. What is important is life.
Shaka, you bring out very, very good points there. Let's shift our attention to Africa. You talked about opening up the economies. We see Nigeria, Ghana, and some other countries where the numbers have been going up. They have said that they've reopened some parts of the economy that people are starving. Things are not running the way they should. So they are afraid that this could actually have even a long-term impact on people. And as a result, they have decided to reopen the economies amidst this crisis. Your thoughts on that?
It is very unfortunate, Paul, because as you say, really, governments probably do not have a lot of answers. They do not have a lot of weapons in their toolboxes to respond to this coronavirus pandemic, and especially its socio-economic effects. You know, I have talked with some people on the African continent who actually fear that, yes, the governments may be coming up with good policies of locking up, lockups, and stuff like that, that people should, in fact, stay in their houses, not go out. Some countries, in fact, even have curfew. People hardly go anywhere. And that is supposed to be a policy that is supposed to be working in their best interests. But they fear that by doing that, without having another policy or an accompanying sort of policy or measure, or providing what they call an economic lifeline. They call it an economic stimulus in the West, including here. Without providing an economic lifeline, some of these people fear that they could, in fact, end up fighting another more potent virus. And this particular potent virus, Paul, they say, is starvation.
A lot of people have raised those concerns, especially the vulnerable people who cannot afford to buy food and stock food, people who are not in the middle class, people who are not rich. The average African is starving. The average African is hungry. They can't possibly do anything about this. So their patience is wearing out.
You know, there is a saying that necessity is the mother of invention. You cannot believe what a young man, a young, hungry woman can actually be capable of doing. When you read history, sometimes these are the causes, the sources of social, economic, political revolutions. Because people, at the end of the day, cannot survive. They cannot live without making sure that when they are hungry, they have unfettered access to food. When they are thirsty, they have unfettered access to water. Just in the same way, as a human being, you are able to survive because you have unfettered access to oxygen. Without oxygen, without food, without water, you cease to be a human being. And I think that I have often talked about how, for example, a very classic book called the Bible to those who are Christians, and I think the Quran, the Torah, and every kind of classic, book, which essentially is like the constitution of religion. they talk about something like, to whom much is given, more is expected. In fact, I might as well say, in this particular case, to whom much is given, I think we could rightly say that sharing much of that with your neighbors, with society, should be an imperative. Because this virus itself has taught us that it does not discriminate against anybody. It hits anybody, anytime, at its choosing. And for that, I think in order for us to really succeed in fighting it, we have to be able to work together. We have to be able to cooperate. Because my security, Paul, is in your security. Your survival is also my survival. So I think that we should go back to the rich African culture where ancestors talked about you have to be your brother's keeper. You have to be your sister's keeper. You have to be your aunt's keeper, your uncle's keeper, your grandma's keeper, your granddad's keeper, your neighbor's keeper. Because at the end of the day, it reminds me of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Shaka,
This is, in fact, this is a situation that provides a context where all of us globally, the human family is in this together. And we can only succeed together if we have to work together, if we have to be there for one another, if we have to be each other's keeper, and finally, if we have to realize that the only way out for all of us, this great human family on this planet Earth, is to hold each other's back.
Shaka, before we go to the comments, there are a lot of comments from your country, Uganda. A lot of people want you to talk about what's happening there in light of MPs allocating nearly $5,000 each, about $2.6 million for them to go around, I guess, during this COVID-19. They claim they were going to be maybe helping out their communities. But when you think about countries trying to fundraise money or trying to buy equipment, is this the right time for members of parliament really to be dishing out money to themselves?
You know, it doesn't seem like you're really talking about members of parliament. Because if you were talking about members of parliament, one would have thought that these members of parliament legitimately represent and reflect constituencies, which actually vote for them periodically in order to go to those parliaments in the city so that they can actually make decisions that reflect the interests of their constituents. But when you are talking about a society, Paul, where it is a democratically challenged sort of society, where, for example, people who go into parliament, people who go into state house, do not account to those people who supposedly sent them there, do not account to anybody except to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families, the stomachs of their friends, and not society. It is not surprising that that could happen. Because man, as it were, is a selfish individual. We are all very selfish in our own ways. The only way we can function in a civilized way is if we put ourselves in a context where there are checks and balances. Unless there are checks and balances, where you know that in order for you to do whatever you do, you have to justify what you are doing to your bosses, in which case, your constituents, the voters who sent you to parliament, you have to account to them. If you don't think you need them really, at the end of the day, because in the next election, which is really not election, so so to speak, but a selection, then you don't have to worry about them because they're not really important. So I think that Ugandans have to ask themselves this question. They have to look themselves in the mirror. And it is not limited to Ugandans, by the way, Paul. It is the vast majority of the African people on the African continent, with a few exceptions, sincerely. They have to ask themselves, am I a citizen of this country? In order to be a citizen, Paul, first and foremost, you have to owe allegiance to the state. And once you owe allegiance to the state, it means, therefore, that you have constitutional rights. Well, another one might call it inalienable rights, or birthrights for that matter, in which case you employ the person of the president. You employ the chief justice, the ambassadors, the cabinet ministers, the members of parliament serve at your discretion.
Right. Yep.
Because next time there is an election, you will have to determine whether those people deserve your trust in order to continue supposedly representing you.
I need to bring in some comments, Shaka. Let's go to Bo Sakina Sumbua in Madagascar. Shaka, the last show you talked about innovations are coming out of Africa, but sadly you didn't mention anything coming out of Madagascar. I want to tell you that we have some great innovations in regard to COVID-19, and this is proof, or this is verification, that something good can come out of Africa. And I think this speaks to other innovations coming out of Africa.
I am very, very happy, Bo, from Madagascar, that you do have that kind of innovation to help fight the coronavirus pandemic. And for that, I definitely owe you an apology, because in my research, I think I overlooked certain things. I was not able to come up with that kind of tool that has actually been innovated in Madagascar. And I say this from the deepest better part of the bottom of my cavalry heart and soul. As a matter of fact, there are so many other innovations. For example, I looked at Tunisia. The University of Tunisia is making a lot of, for example, PPE. They are making personal protection, equipment that helps the frontline, troops. They are, for example, coming up with masks and all that kind of stuff. And that is very important. Then you have Southern Africa, especially South Africa. Some of the universities like Witwatersrand, some of the universities like University of Cape Town. You have the Ethiopian University of Addis Ababa.
Makerere University in Uganda, Nairobi University.
Paul, I am very glad to tell you that out of your alma mater, the mighty Makerere University, Kampala, is also in this particular league. Yeah. It seems to me that the African youth, the changing demographics, are stepping up to the plate. And they need to do more than that, because in this particular case, what Africa needs really is to learn from this virus, which does not give a damn about borders and boundaries, that we should actually move away from these superficial borders and boundaries, which were essentially given to us by Europeans. in 1884 in Berlin under Chancellor Bismarck without a single African present at that table. It seems to me that we need now to go back to the dreams of the African founding fathers, leaders sincerely, who basically did not have either the boundaries or borders in their minds when it came to Africa. For them, it was one Africa, one people, one culture, African dignity, the African personality.
Shaka, I need to bring in a quicker comment. Let's go to Jay in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Do you think the president of Tanzania erred in judgment, especially when all the other East African countries closed their borders? For us, it was business as usual.
I have to say, frankly, that it is very unfortunate because I was told, for example, that not only is business as usual in Tanzania, but that in fact the major market center in Dar es Salaam, Karioko market, and I've been there many times, it operates normally. I was told that the president of Tanzania, Dr. John Pombe Magufuli, he said Tanzanians should go to churches, to mosques, and pray that they are liberated from this coronavirus. Surely, as a scientist, I think he should follow essentially what the rest of the world is doing. He should be guided in some of these decisions sincerely, not by politics, not by emotions, but by science and by facts.
Let's go to Glud in Somalia. He says, Shaka, you've just said that as Africans, we need to unite in the fight against the coronavirus. But our leaders are letting us down. Our leaders have really not given us the opportunity to unite as a people and maybe showcase what we have.
Well, then, those are probably not leaders. Because if in fact they were leaders, they would be walking not very far away from their own people, from people who helped put them in those type of positions. You are talking about rulers. You're talking about people who are not patriotic to their nations, but people perhaps who are patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends, and not society, not country. I think the changing demographics, for me, gives me hope. I think that when you look at the various innovations that are going on in Africa right now, those innovations must be a reflection of the changing demographics in Africa.
I want to thank you very much for being a great guest. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time.
Thank you very much, Ndugu Paul Ndiho. It's always a pleasure to be your guest.
And to you all, our audience, keep those comments coming. I look forward to another edition of Shaka Extra Time next week. Until then, thank you so much.